Good evening. It is Wednesday, June 18th, 2014, 5:30 p.m., and this is the first meeting of the IDOT Traffic Stop Data Task Force for the City of Urbana. So I'd like to call this meeting to order. I'm told we have some introductory remarks to begin with, so Mayor Pressing, if you'd join us, and please, the floor is yours.
First, I want to thank you all for being willing to serve on this task force. I appreciate you taking the time. It's a very sensitive issue, whether it's prejudice or the perception of prejudice. People are really concerned about it. And I hope you'll start by taking a good look about how the IDOT numbers are calculated. I think that will shed some light on whether they should be accepted as gospel truth or whether they may have some significant flaws. And they are calculated assuming, first, that the racial composition of drivers in a city can be estimated by the racial composition of the population of that city. And second, that if the ratio of drivers stopped by race exceeds the ratio of people of that race in the population, the police force is using racial profiling. And I'd like to address the first assumption. There are significant differences between the population of Urbana and the population of Champaign. Over half of the traffic stops in Urbana are of people who do not live in Urbana. So that means that if we're using census data to measure the race of drivers, we're going to be off by quite a bit. We don't know how, but I think that's something that you need to take a look at. And also, half of the population of Urbana is University of Illinois students, and they differ from the rest of Urbana's population significantly. I think the population of Champaign is roughly twice that of Urbana, and I'm assuming that half of the students live in Champaign and half live in Urbana. So half of Urbana's population is students, and about 1/4 of Champaign's population is students. The students do not reflect the population mix of the rest of the community. They're far less likely to be African American. 5% of U of I students are African American, and if you look at Urbana's population as a total, and this is from the U.S. Census in 2010, 16.3% of Urbana's population is African American, so that's a big difference. I did a memo to the Urbana City Council dated December 9th, 2013, and that just gives you a rough idea of how these two factors completely change the IDOT ratios for Urbana and Champaign. So I hope that you will take an in-depth look at exactly how the IDOT numbers are calculated early on in your research. And I also ask that you carefully study the procedures used by Urbana police for evidence of racial bias, rather than assuming it is there because Urbana's raw IDOT numbers appear higher than Champaign's if taken at face value. So if you just look at what I gave to the City Council, the raw data shows Urbana with a somewhat higher disparity ratio than Champaign. It was 208% in Urbana versus 179% in Champaign for the year 2012. But as I said, there's a real difference between the population of the cities. The total population, as I said, in Urbana of African Americans was 16.3%. In Champaign, it's 15.6%. But if you take a look at the 43,398, it's probably a different number by now, University of Illinois students, and assume half of them live in each of the cities, it really changes those ratios significantly. I have the years of 2010, 2011, and 2012. The IDOT disparity ratio in Urbana went from 271 to 248 to 2,000 to 208. In Champaign, it went from 219 to 212 to 180. But if you take out the U of I students, Urbana was 153 in 2010 compared to 175 in Champaign. It was 140 in 2011 compared to 170 in Champaign, and it was 118 in 2012 compared to 144 in Champaign. So I'm not saying that my numbers are perfect. I just did a very rough estimate, but I think it's something that you need to take a good hard look at, rather than, just concluding that Urbana somehow does racial profiling, or does racial profiling more than Champaign does. So, anybody have any questions for me?
Ms. Avery.
I want to thank you, Mayor, for your report. Do I have my microphone? It is now. First, I want to thank you, Mayor. I'm happy to serve, and I want to thank you for your report. My only question is that I believe the reason why we want to look at the IDOT studies is not to extract African Americans from the University of Illinois, opposes in wherever they are located in the community. It's that they were stopped in Urbana. And if the racial composition is African Americans, it doesn't matter if they're U of I students or not. The drivers are African American, and that's what we want, I believe.
Okay, I'm just talking about it's a ratio of two fractions. It's the percent of the people stopped, and then it's over the percent of the people in the population. And I'm saying if you change the bottom of that ratio, the people in the population, that changes the ratio itself. So that's what I'm saying. Just look at the arithmetic and how it's calculated, because it's based on estimates.
Okay.
And I think if you look at the top and you say how many people are stopped of various races on the streets of Urbana, it's significant that half those people don't live in Urbana, and yet you're comparing it to the people who live in Urbana. So I'm just saying there's some problems there. And I don't expect everybody to, just take this at face value, but I think it's something that you need to carefully look at and work through the numbers and see how they change based on different assumptions.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for the mayor? Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
We will definitely take your words into account as we start our work. I had a couple of comments that I wanted to make to begin with. By the way, I'm Pete Resnick. I'm chairing the task force here. And when we do roll call, I'll ask each of you to introduce yourselves and just say a sentence or two about why you're here and what your connection to all this is. I wanted to welcome you all. We've got a big job ahead of us, and I'm looking forward to it. It's really important work that we're doing. It's important, but it's a difficult topic, and I think the mayor alluded to this. I want to talk about a particular set of issues that we're bound to face. And as chair, I'm going to try and facilitate things, but I wanted to talk a little bit about this so that we all sort of keep it in mind. Words like discrimination and bias and racism have different meanings to different people, and I want us all to be aware of that and try to help each other understand some of those different meanings. Some of us have lots of familiarity with these terms because of the background we have with these issues, and we know the different uses of these words. Some of us are here because of different expertise we might have and might not know these distinctions right offhand. So the example I always love to give, I'm on the Human Relations Commission. If someone on the Human Relations Commission comes up to me and says, Pete, you're participating in racism, or sometimes even, Pete, you're a racist, my common answer is usually, oh, yes, of course I am all the time. What in particular would you like to discuss about that issue? Now, some folks who might not know the background of that might hear that and think that I was being accused of being a bigot, or that I'm somehow malicious or otherwise mean-spirited. And because of the way those terms sometimes get used, I think we have to be cognizant of that. You're going to hear the terms used. We're going to talk about things like institutional racism, structural discrimination, implicit bias, and sometimes folks are going to give public comment and are going to say things like, we or a police officer is being a racist. And sometimes they're not going to tell us what particular meaning of that word is. Even if someone is experiencing discrimination due to what we call disparate impact as against disparate treatment, the effects might be the same to that person. If bias is being pointed out, whether it's bias due to just pure ignorance or bias due to some implicit bias, another term we get to use, the effects might be the same. And as I said, I'd like to, have us help each other with those words. But the important thing, and maybe I think you might not expect this conclusion, what I'd like to ask of all of you is to try and have as thick a skin as you can in this discussion. These words are going to come up, you're going to hear them, and it's great to feel passionate about people in the community that are adversely affected in ways. It's great to feel a responsibility being on this task force to address those issues, but I don't think any of us should feel personally offended if someone says that the task force is acting out of bias or that the police department is acting out of racism. Let's presume that if you're feeling offended, the person has simply used the term in a way that you're not familiar with. And I am going to try as chair to make the discussions as productive and respectful as possible. I'm happy to make sure that we all understand each other and discuss some of these terms outside of the context of the meeting as you like. But these are important things that I think sometimes we get lost and someone will say, there's racism here, and we get very defensive. And I'd like to ask us all to really kind of keep that in mind, that sometimes that word is not being used the way you think it is. I hope I can count on all of your patience through this process and your good work, and I'm sure that we're going to accomplish the goals of this task force. So I appreciate that. With that, I'd like to do a roll call. As your name is called, please introduce yourself. Just give us a sentence or two about why you're here, what your background is, what your connection to the community is. So, Tony, please.
Patricia Avery.
Ms. Avery.
Yes, my name is Patricia Avery, and I am here as a member of the Champaign County branch of the NAACP. We have been studying and looking at this issue for a number of years.
I think your mic's on, Tricia.
Thank you. They must have heard me pretty well. Again, my name is Patricia Avery. I am a member of the Champaign County NAACP of the Champaign County branch. I am here working with this task force happily because we have been looking at this issue for a number of years. So I do commend the City of Urbana and the council for taking a look at this issue.
Thank you.
Andrew Charles.
I'm here as a member of the Urbana Police Department. I've been a 25-year member of the Urbana Police Department. I've spent all of that time in the patrol division. I've been a canine handler. I'm currently a sergeant, and I've been a sergeant for the last 15 years, so I supervise officers on the street, the officers that are making these traffic stops, and I've also reviewed the traffic tickets as they come through. I'm not currently a resident of the City of Urbana. I have lived in the City of Urbana for 32 years of my life, and I have direct family members that live here in the City of Urbana and have lived here in the City of Urbana for about the last 170 years. So I have a vested interest in seeing the City of Urbana be a positive place and a progressive place and a place for everybody to live.
Nicole Anderson Cobb.
Good evening, everyone. I hope you can hear me well. Again, thank you so much for the opportunity to serve. I currently am a visiting professor at the University of Illinois in the Department of African American Studies and Research. One of the areas that I teach in is the issue of hate crimes. And so I have an opportunity to kind of work with and help students think through these issues of hate, intolerance, and bias in the courses that I teach. And what has come up for me over and again in the courses that I've taught is that I'm hearing students of color across the board, but particularly African-American students, but also international students, and particularly Asian students who are reporting some concern about traffic stops that they're experiencing. And so my hope is to be able to serve the task force, but also to be of service to the students, to perhaps equip them with better information about moving through our community, and to help them become better acclimated to the community and the culture here. So my role is twofold: to serve the task force, but also to be a conduit between campus and community. So thank you.
Alejandra Coronel.
Yes, I'm here, and thank you for letting me be part of this committee. I'm looking forward to this because I think that I've been in this community for 16 years, and I've been involved actually with different groups for 14, and I just think that it's an opportunity to kind of engage in the community and educate everyone about what is to work with the police, and also to understand what the law imply and what we as a citizens we need to do. I'm currently working for Presence Covenant Medical Center, so I'm here in Urbana quite often because of my job. I'm also serving for the Human Relations Commission and the City of Champaign. And all these years that I'm being involved with different programs at the city is that I'm very passionate about community policing. So anything that I need to be about educating people how to get along with the police alone, and also to understand what is the perspective of a community member and be a citizen, and don't understand what a police does because we don't have to train. So I'm always forward to kind of get involved and able to understand as a citizen how we can work along, because more likely we're going to interact with police, even for a good thing or a bad thing. And I would like our community to understand what do we do and live in a better way.
I'm Eric Jacobson, and I believe my role here is as the City Council representative to this force. I have an unusual personal background with respect to racial relations, because my wife and I have 2 adopted African American children, 2 adopted Asian children, 2 adopted children that look like us, and then 2 children by birth. So I don't, in the ordinary course of my life, going about on the street, about the university, in other public places, I don't, as an individual, experience racism. On the other hand, my wife and I have had the occasion to help our children experience it and work through it. And not so much recently, but certainly there were times earlier in our marriage and when the kids were younger, when as a family group, we definitely experienced hostility because of having a racially mixed family. So I'm going, and I also, I'm also a scientist, and I work with numbers, I work with statistics, and so I hope that all of these things will help me to be a constructive member of the task force.
Will Kiles.
Always a pleasure to serve. I serve in different capacities of the community. Most people know me by my service on the city council in Champaign. You know, police community relationships and improving upon them has always been not just an interest, but more of a passion. It's a necessity in our community. And so in order to do that, from time to time, we do studies like this, and we engage in conversations that we will engage over the next few months. And we look at the numbers, we look at the data, we look at what they represent, we study them. It seems like we have a lot of diversity on the board, and we come up with, we see if the numbers have any validity, and then out of that we come up with solutions that and recommendations that hopefully can be enacted in the future. So look forward to serving, and thank you.
Peter Resnick.
So, again, I'm Pete Resnick. I'm chairing the task force. I come to this because I'm vice chair of the Urbana Human Relations Commission, which, if for those who don't know, is the Anti-Discrimination Commission. We do a lot of work in discrimination of public accommodation, employment, and housing in the city. We also advise the city administration about discrimination issues within city administration and city government, and as well as look at city contracts and discrimination there. I have several hats around town with regard to my volunteer work. This one is taking my hat off. I get to be facilitator instead of the one yelping at the back of the room, and I hope I accomplish that task well. So I will be looking forward to you all helping me drive this along, and I will try and be as neutral a chair as I can be.
Chandra Somerville.
Good evening, and thank you for allowing me to serve. I come as a concerned citizen, and I also bring experience of being the cultural competence coordinator for the Champaign County Mental Health Board. What interests me about this group is that I would like to begin to see how the data regarding disparities and disproportionality are driving decisions that are being made, and also looking at how the disparities and access to mental health is impacting the racial profiling or the stops that are geared toward people who have mental health challenges.
Paul Testa.
Thank you. My name is Paul Testa. I'm a graduate student in the political science department at the University of Illinois. I've lived here for 4 years and have a background in statistics, and I'm excited to actually apply those skills to something that matters, because a lot of the time in my day-to-day, it's hard to see how what I do connects, and so thank you.
And we do have one absent member. Who was that?
Shinjini Chattopadhyay.
Okay.
Couldn't be with us this evening.
All right, and hopefully we can find a time that we can all get together and meet. Great. And by the way, I'd like our two staff folks to introduce themselves since they're at the table. So why don't you go ahead?
My name is Tony Weck. I work with and for Todd Rent, the Human Relations Officer, also for the Chief of Staff. I've been with the City of Urbana about 11 and a half years, and I also I'll be your recording secretary, so basically that means I do the minutes, and I also do that for the Human Relations Commission and the Civilian Police Review Board.
Thank you. Todd?
Hello, I'm Todd Rent. I'm the Human Relations Officer for the City of Urbana. We provide support, my office provides support obviously for the Urbana Human Relations Commission, for the Civilian Police Review Board, and now for this task force. The one thing that I would like to do is thank everyone for being willing to come out and take your time and volunteer to discuss this issue. I'm offering my office to provide whatever staff support that we can provide, whatever information that we can provide. You know, I will tell you from a professional standpoint, we are at your service, and we will try to do the best that we can in serving you. From a more personal standpoint, from the standpoint of someone who lives here in the community, and I don't often express those views publicly, as Peter will tell you, what I want to tell you is this is extremely important. And I want to thank you all for being willing from a personal standpoint to come out and spend your time doing this. Peter made an allusion to sort of this intentional and unintentional bias, right? And we can talk more about what that is over time. But the thing that Peter pointed out, and I want to reiterate, is that whether or not the bias, if it exists, is intentional or unintentional, it harms the harm is completely isolated in terms of it will always occur if there is bias. And the harm doesn't just occur to the individual, but occurs to the community. And particularly when you have a key relationship between, as essential as the relationship as the community and the police that community and that come from that community and that work with that community, you have to make sure, and it's more than worth the effort to make sure that the bias is not occurring, whether intentional or unintentional. So if this committee comes out and does the hard work and comes out and says, we think that things are going very well, great. If the committee comes out and says, we think that there are some opportunities for change in order to eliminate biases, absolutely great. Either of those will be fine as long as the committee works very hard to get to the truth of the matter, so that whatever diagnosis that is arrived at fits the actual disease if the disease exists. Because we all know that if you prescribe a particular medicine for a disease that either doesn't exist or for the wrong disease, it can do much more harm than good. So I want to thank you for your service in advance and let you know that my office takes this seriously, and I take this seriously as an individual. Thank you.
Thank you. So tonight's agenda is mostly housekeeping details and figuring out how we're going to start our work. I hope that as you've been sitting here and when you first came in, you got to sneak a peek at the list of bylaws in front of us as that we're going to hopefully adopt as rules of order. These are in draft form. You'll also find a copy of the resolution that created the task force. I hope you do read those over at home and get a sense of what our mission is. But as we sit here, I'd like you to go through the bylaws, and I'll just highlight certain portions. These are mostly stolen from other bylaws of other commissions for the city of Urbana, so there shouldn't be too much controversy in here, but I want to make sure that everybody's aware of these, and if there are any concerns, we get them addressed. And then if we, I'm going to open the floor for just general discussion right now of these. Basically, to go over them, Article 1 is just saying there's a resolution that created us. And that's what we're going to do. Article 2 is laying out that we're not going to conflict with the resolution. That's going to trump whatever we say in these bylaws. And it says that we can go to Todd, and Todd may go to the city attorney for questions that we might have. Article 3 lays out my responsibilities to organize the meeting and to make sure that all of the assorted I's are dotted and T's crossed. Article 4 is laying out that we're going to set up a monthly meeting at a regular time, and how that meeting can be canceled if we need to, and that we have to follow the Open Meetings Act. It also notes a general agenda format that we'll use for each meeting. And if you think that for some reason we should shift around the order of those things, we can talk about that. But whether public input comes at the end or the beginning, different groups do different things. So if you have a particular preference, you can let us know. We have it at the end right now. Article 5 is about how we're going to conduct things. Is Article 5 where we mentioned that we'll be using Robert's Rules of Order as the general rules? Right, Section 2 of Article 5. My personal preference is we have the discussion as clearly and comfortably as we can. We'll use Robert's Rules when we have to take some formal proposals and if things are starting to get a little hairy, but otherwise, so long as things are in control, I'm happy to have a little bit of free discussion. And it lays out how we will do votes and the things that are required. Article 6 is about how we'll take public input. That will give everybody 5 minutes to speak, which can be extended, and that we, as a task force, can ask the public for ask the person who's commenting questions for clarification, but we won't get into long discussions with the public. If folks have questions for us to answer, we'll ask them to submit those, and we'll take those up at the next meeting or at the end of public input so that everybody gets a chance to speak. And Article 7 is about minutes and the records that we have to keep for the Open Meetings Act, and 8 and 9 are anything that's illegal. We're not going to, that turns out to be illegal in the bylaws doesn't count, and that we need to have a majority to amend the bylaws. So does anybody have any general questions about these or any concerns? Eric?
I think I know the answer to this, but there's, of course, in state law, there's a whole list of things where you can go into closed session if one or the other of those things is going to be discussed. Probably we would never have occasion to do that, but do the bylaws preclude, in the event, I guess the two things that maybe I could imagine coming up would be if we were to discuss something that reflected on a personnel matter within the city. And the other thing would be if we were to discuss something, if there was something relevant to our mission that had to do, that could conceivably have to do with litigation that the city could or might be involved in. Those, I think that's probably not going to happen. But do we have do our bylaws preclude us dealing with that?
I'm taking a look. So Article 4, Section 4 says that we're going to have all meetings shall be open to the public, noticed and posted in accordance with the Illinois Open Meetings Act.
Right, and so those exceptions are in the Illinois Open Meetings Act.
Right.
So maybe we're okay. I don't know.
I don't think that there's anything that would preclude the task force from meeting in closed session if it's appropriate under the Open Meetings Act. However, I'm happy to put together some language also that would be explicit closed session language, just to sort of fill in that gap if that's what the task force would like to do.
And basically, the Open Meetings Act provides, and we'll mention down at the bottom, you have a little homework assignment at the end of the meeting. But the Open Meeting Act provides that we can go into closed session if someone explicitly makes a motion to do so, and there's got to be a vote in order to do so, and it's got to be for one of a very long list of reasons, but it's got to be, you've got to, in the motion, say which reason we are hereby allowed to go into closed session. I think copying that language of how to go into closed session, should we need to, as an extra bullet item would be fine. And I'm fine, by the way, if at the end of this discussion we decide to adopt these and do that as an amendment next time we meet, that's also fine. So, any other questions about what we've got here? Ms. Avery.
My only question would be in terms of under section 6, I think it's Article 4, Section 6, when we talk about our agenda, the items on the agenda, if there were business under other business or new business, I guess my question would just be, as the chair, would you be setting the agenda? And if members of the committee were interested in items being placed on the agenda, how is that done?
That's a good question, and I don't, do we have that in the section on calling a meeting?
I don't
And
think we
I'm
make any
happy to-
specific allusion to agenda items.
What's that?
I don't think we make any specific
We
language
don't.
for agenda items.
Obviously, as chair, I'm happy to, if someone contacts me prior to the meeting, the Open Meetings Act requires that we do 48 hours notice for any meeting, so you'd have to contact me beyond, or Todd for that matter, beyond 48 hours to add to the agenda. But I think an additional statement that says that that's how we add meeting agenda items could be added.
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Jacobson.
So let me make sure I understand this. I think that we have to stick to the agenda that we publish, but there are, I don't know, maybe this is a gray area. There are some sorts of agenda changes that can be made at the meeting. So for example, if you decide to change the order in which you take up items, I don't think anybody would complain about that. If you decided to introduce something really substantive that had not been in the public notice and place it as a new agenda item, I think if anybody were of a mind to challenge it, they could.
Well,
Todd.
the 48-hour requirement really pertains to any actual business or actions that will be taken. So if you're introducing an agenda item with the intention of actually taking action on that item, then that would be an invalid action if it occurs less than 48 hours or with less than 48 hours notice. But generally, we don't like to put agenda items on after that 48 because we want the public to be aware of everything that we're going to be discussing. Does it happen? Yes. And if it's not, if the commission or the board is not taking action on that item, I don't think it's necessarily a violation, or at least it doesn't invalidate that item. We just prefer not to do it.
I believe that's exactly right. Yes, ma'am.
I think in Article 5 and Section 11, it kind of cover what you just mentioned, Mr. Jacobson, about the changes in the agenda and in closing public hearings.
It
So
does
I think that,
Oh, and the interesting thing about this, I think this is a carryover because some of this was stolen from the Human Relations Commission. So this is talking about closing public hearings, but not closed sessions of meetings. The Human Relations Commission sometimes has hearings for cases that are brought against people for discrimination. So I think we can, when you make the change, something about closed meetings, but yes, that definitely can go in right there.
are we going to discuss about that as a group to decide if this is something that we're looking for, or this is a time that we can talk about it?
I'm sorry, say that again.
This is something that we are going to be talking as a group to decide if closed meeting will
Yeah.
be decided now, or is going to be by the end of it?
The requirement for closed meetings, it will come up as the time, I think what we should do is, I think Todd can draft some language about closed meetings, and if we choose to adopt the bylaws as they are now, Todd can bring those additions, and we can decide whether we even need to add them, but at least we'll have some text to look at. But the act of going into closed meetings, assuming we're allowing ourselves to do that at all, we do on the spot, and there has to be a vote, and there has to be a specific call out of which part of the Open Meetings Act.
Okay.
So, yeah, I'd suggest you prepare text one way or the other, and we may or may not adopt that. Any other concerns or questions about the draft bylaws that we've got here? So, does anyone want to make a motion to adopt these bylaws?
I move that the bylaws be adopted as written, with the understanding that we'll see some possible mandatory verbiage at the next meeting.
Second.
All right, so I have a motion by Mr. Jacobson, a second by Mr. Kiles. Any other discussion of the bylaws? Any other questions or comments? All right, then I think we should take a roll call vote to adopt the bylaws. So, Tony?
Yes.
Andrew Charles,
Yes.
Nicole Anderson Cobb,
Yes.
Alejandra Coronel,
Yes.
Eric Jacobson,
Yes.
Will Kiles,
Yes.
Peter Resnick,
Yes.
Chandra Somerville,
Yes.
Paul Testa.
Yes.
Great, so that motion carries unanimously. So we now have at least bylaws to work with, and Todd, you'll bring us some suggested text next time for those open issues, and we can amend the bylaws at that time if we need to. Great, so now having bylaws, I can ask for a motion to approve the agenda as written. I hope you've all seen it. It's not very exciting this time. Does anyone want to make such a motion?
I move we approve the agenda as written.
Does
I'll
anyone wish to
second that.
second? So I have a motion by Mr. Jacobson, a second by Ms. Avery. Any discussion or changes to the agenda as written? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any
Aye.
opposed? All right, so the agenda is approved. Moving on, Section 7 is old business. Being that we're new, we have none. Ms. Avery, you had a question?
I'm sorry. I guess I wanted to ask the question. I probably should have asked the question before we approved the agenda. But we were talking about whether you had alluded to in the bylaws if we were comfortable with having public input
Oh, at the
in the
beginning or
beginning
the
or the
end?
end, and we never really discussed it. And we just approved the agenda as it is. But I'm wondering if we might have a moment to talk about
And-
what the census is,
So
consensus is.
how shall we handle this? I just want to make sure this hits the agenda in a way that does not violate our rules of order here. So we've just approved the agenda, and we've approved the bylaws, which have the public input at the end.
Right.
Let's, I think, do we have a motion to reconsider for agendas? Can we do that?
If we must, yeah.
If we must.
I think it would be fine either way.
All
but-
right.
Sure.
I will take Ms. Avery as making a motion to reconsider. That does not need to be seconded or does not need to debate.
It's just for the purpose of
I-
discussion. I'm sorry.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry.
No, just fine. I need to have my little Robert's Rules of Order in front of me. I have it at home. All those in favor of reconsidering just for a moment, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Good. I think we're back in regular order. So, with regard to public input, Ms. Avery, you had a question or comment?
Well, I know that it has been customary that sometimes the public does have an opportunity before the meeting to actually offer some input. I, on the other hand, think that I will support the public input where maybe moving the staff report, well, maybe leaving it where it is because staff report might be a little longer and you want to get your public input. But I really would like to hear the sentiments of the rest of the committee. I don't have a problem with keeping the public input more toward the end. That gives the public an opportunity to hear our discussion, formulate any comments or questions that they have of the task force. So I support having the public input towards the end, but I don't know what my colleagues feel about that.
Mr. Kiles?
I support it as well based on past practices, but just experiences where we've been involved in these discussions, whether at council, school board, or even CCAP. Typically when you have the comment in the beginning, people don't have the public doesn't have an opportunity to respond or add insight to what's going on, what the conversation or discussion was. So I support it as is as well.
Any other comment or concern about this? I will say that in some, I know the Human Relations Commission, we do them up front, as does the City Council, but they also give an opportunity for every agenda item to see if there is particular public input about the agenda item. I don't know whether that's useful we can also, as Ms. Avery pointed out, revisit this question at a later date if we find that it's not convenient where it is, or we want to change things around. It just takes a vote of the majority of us to do that, so. Mr. Jacobson?
Yeah, I think wherever we put it, there will be times when we wish we had put it in the other place. Because sometimes it's very, very good to hear from the public before we discuss something. We get some new perspectives that enter into our discussion on the city council. On the other hand, sometimes it's good for the public to hear us before they talk to us, because that gives them an idea of what might be more effective for them to say. So either way, it'll be all right with me, because I know sometimes that way will work better, and other times we'll wish it were the other way around.
There is any chance that we can have it in the beginning and also at the end?
I think, Todd, if you write up in your things that we're going to consider for amending the bylaws next time, doing it both at the beginning and the end, or maybe doing it before agenda items and then at the end. Give us a couple of choices, and then we can decide to leave it as it is, or choose a particular way to go forward. I think that'd be fine.
I guess my question, would one of those ways be just leaving it up to sort of the board in terms of making it flexible so that you all could decide as the need arises?
And that's also a possibility. Right now, we have it listed at the end. We could put something in the public input section which says, though listed at the end, public input, during the, can be moved at the discretion of the task force.
I agree with that. I think we'll actually, on balance, come out best if we can be flexible about that, because we're going to get a sense as we go into meetings what the agenda is, what we've heard from the community, what the dynamics of the meeting are likely to be, and which way it'll work better.
Okay, good. Well, thank you for mentioning that. I appreciate it. And I take it you wish to withdraw your motion to reconsider? Or no, we already voted on that. We should re-vote on the agenda. So do I hear another motion for approval of the agenda?
So move.
And I second.
Motion by Mr. Jacobson, second by Ms. Avery. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Very good. All right, so moving on to old business, we have none for today. We do have one item of new business, which is figuring out when we're going to meet. So this time we shot for Wednesday evening. Is there anybody here? I don't know if we know about our other member. Is there anybody here for whom this is generally a showstopper and you just will not be able to make it if we make it a Wednesday evening and we'll just pick one of the month? Todd, do you know?
Yes. Speaking. Sorry. We did receive a message from Dr. Chattopadhyay, and she mentioned that she's out of town today, but at least there is some indication that she may be free going forward, and we can verify that.
Okay. Is there anybody else for whom this time would be terrible?
You stated that it would just be once a month?
Once a month would be our regular meeting.
Okay,
That's plausible?
yes.
All right. Mr. Jacobson?
Yeah, I guess the only thing I can think of, not for me, but for some folks, they go to church regularly Wednesday night. So if they want to participate, and I guess if we had a meeting as brief as this, could get out in time, but some of these meetings are likely to go longer. And so if that's a consideration, and I hope I'm not violating separation of church and state, but I think there'll be people who'll be interested who might perceive that as a conflict.
Mr. Kyles?
I agree with Eric. I think that although it's once a month, regular church goers are very passionate about going to church, and short of Jesus coming back, or they're not going to come to our meeting. They're not going to. So, I mean, for me, it's not an issue. because my church service is on Thursday. But, but yeah, we could. I'm flexible. This meeting time for me is fine, but I do agree with Eric.
Yes, ma'am.
I was going to say, will it impact the community input?
That was the
And
other thing I was
if it
wondering
will
as well.
impact our community, I think that we should consider changing the day. And I'm not sure what that would look like for the schedule.
So I guess the question is to Todd, do you know if there's another day during the week that people had availability and that the room is available, which is the interesting combination?
Yeah, so we don't have the room availability in front of us. Wednesday, by far, was the most open day, this sort of time
Interesting.
slot by far. And we can pull out the tables and sort of send them back out to everyone. But it would be really nice to get a solid regular meeting date tonight so that everyone could plan around it. And what I will say is this, because, well, there are probably any day and time that we choose, there are going to be some drawbacks to that. And certainly we can call special meetings and special hearings if we feel the need to get additional input. I'm just sort of trying to work around the possibility of, I'm trying to sort of make it possible for us to choose a day and time, hopefully tonight. But not necessarily. We will work with you to choose whatever time you like best.
Ms. Avery?
Actually, Todd just raised the same thought that I had about special meetings. I did have a concern about Wednesdays as well in terms of public input and Wednesday being a Bible study night. But there's not going to be any perfect night. So I'm thinking we will know ahead of time if the community is interested in coming out and speaking to the task force on any particular issue or something that we might be working on. So I think that we may be able to control that by calling special meetings if we need to.
All right. I'm seeing enough up and down nodding heads that maybe that's the approach to take. So, Todd, is a motion in order to actually vote on a night to have this? And we are now on the third Wednesday of the month. Is that, well, we know the third Wednesday is generally open in this room, or we don't know that for sure?
It's open until 7.
It's open until, and there's something at 7.
Right, the Zoning Board of Appeals.
So if we're going to have a long meeting, that can be a problem.
Right.
Let's have short meetings.
Or we could start earlier, and I don't know where, I mean, most people get off at 5, so we generally don't start before 5:30, but if that's something that's a concern and, you know.
And again, maybe we do that for special meetings where we suspect it's going to go long, either start earlier or choose a different day for a special meeting. But we have our regular monthly meeting to take care of nitty-gritty business. I'm comfortable with that. If someone wants to make a motion to that effect, I'm glad to entertain that.
I move we meet the third Wednesday of every month at 5:30 p.m. in the City Council chambers.
All right.
And second.
I have a motion by Mr. Jacobson, a second by Ms. Correll. Correll? Yes.
Coronel.
Coronel. Thank you. I'm going to catch up with everybody's name eventually. Some of them I know because they've been sitting in front of many rooms for far too long. So, any further discussion on that date and time? So that's we're designating the third Wednesday of the month, 5:30 p.m. All right. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? So that motion carries. That is our designated meeting time. Our next order of business is public input. Seeing only one member of the public, does that member of the public wish to address us? Thank you, sir. And staff report. Todd, is there anything to report from your office at this point?
Not at this point. However, I guess one of the things we can deal with as we go along is populating the agenda for the next meeting. And certainly, I could get input from everyone and just sort of distill down the salient points into agenda items, or we can choose some other process for doing that, but obviously we need to have a way of getting started.
Right. I'm happy to meet up with you to come up with some general agenda items for our next meeting. And if anybody has particular topics, you will, what I'll try to do is have, if Todd and I get together and come up with some general topics for the next meeting, distribute those to you well ahead of time as a draft agenda. If you have particular things you want to add or think are more important or less important, I'm happy to have you all do that. And everybody has email access, and we can do it that way. One thing about email, and actually anything else on the staff report, because I'll bring up the announcement bit in just a second.
Just one other item. One of the things that I think may be helpful, and you all can decide, is we have an electronic packet of everything that the city of Urbana has discussed in regards to this issue over the last several years. We can send that out to everyone via email, sort of to get everyone started on a background. Is that amenable to everyone?
I think that sounds great. Thank you. All right, our last agenda item is announcements, and item A in announcements turns out to be a homework assignment for you all. Some of you who are public officials have already done your duty in this regard. For the Open Meetings Act, you are all required, now that you are on a public committee or otherwise, to go take the little online class for the Open Meetings Act training. If you've not done so, please do so. A couple of the important points that you will learn in that training is that getting together and talking about task force business with even a few of us outside of the context of an announced meeting is a big no-no. Fines and everything. That includes group electronic communications about business of the task force. So you will get email occasionally from Tony or Todd with announcements of meetings and things, and though they're often very good about blind carbon copying everybody's, you'll get everybody else's email address, I'm sure, over time. Do not send out mass mailings with your thoughts on an upcoming agenda item. That would be a violation of the Open Meetings Act as well. So there's a load in that training to catch up with. Make sure you're aware of all of those little rules. You get a little certificate at the end of the training, which then Todd will take and file with the appropriate folks and make sure that you are signed, sealed, and delivered. So please do take care of that before the next meeting rolls around so that Todd has your certificates. Any other announcements to make?
I have a question.
Oh, question, yes.
Is there an annual requirement, or is it just a one-time thing?
I believe, Todd,
Technically,
do you know?
technically, I believe it's an annual requirement. However, you get it done the first time, and that's probably going to suffice for this task force, since the task force is supposed to be done by next spring. So.
My
Ms.
question was about whether or not this is on the city website, or is it something?
We'll send
you'll-
out a link to everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Jacobson.
So I have the Open Meetings Act on my mind a lot. And there was a bit of a gray area that we decided functionally within City Council where we were going to draw the line. One member of the City Council may send an informational item to the rest of the council. And that's not if it's an FYI, it's not a violation. And it can even be an opinion, but no one may hit the reply to all button. Then that becomes a violation of Open Meetings Act because you're having an interactive dialogue. Now I'm looking around and it looks to me like a quorum would be 6. So 3 of us, which would not be a majority of a quorum, could discuss something, but 4 of us could not. Am I correct in that?
I believe so, but I want to get the city attorney's input on this because generally he's advised that any more than 2 would be, or at least that's my recollection. I could be totally wrong with this about that. But he really, in order to be very prudent about the issue, would rather there never to be more than 2 public officials talking at any one time. But I will get his definitive opinion on that and get that back to you.
With regard to email, and I know we've done this in different ways with different commissions I've been on, one of the easiest ways to avoid any question, if you do have something to send out to the whole board, send it to Todd or Tony and they can redistribute. And then there's no question about who it's from, who you're replying to, and that makes it much safer. So just as a practice, I think that's a much easier way to go. But yes, I agree. There's at least enough fuzz in the Open Meetings Act that if you sent out just an FYI to everybody but nobody replied, you probably wouldn't be in violation. Even so, I suggest using our staff people for those sorts of things.
I will do that in this context. Yes.
Great. Any other questions on the Open Meetings Act training? And any other announcements? Well, thank you all for coming. This was all, as I said, administrivia. Hopefully next time we will have a nice full agenda of things that we will get started on, and I appreciate you all coming. Do I have a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
All right. Did you get
Or you
those
can
both,
take
Tony?
Paul's second.
And there is no discussion of a motion for adjournment. All those in favor, please say aye.
All right.
Any opposed? Thank you. We are adjourned.